Hello, my name is James Mason, and I have the pleasure of filling in for Mr. Galvin today. I will read you the words that he has sent me. Welcome everyone to Seth Crowson's senior speech. I would like to begin by welcoming several special guests who are visiting today for this event. Seth's mom, Debbie, his father, Travis, his brother, Noah, his brother, Zach, are all here. Thank you all for coming. Seth is very active at Augusta Prep. He has participated in theater for 4 years and is currently the Thespian Troupe president. Of course, we all know that he is an integral member of our cross-country and track teams. He is a valuable member of our Model UN team, Green Club, and chess team. He participated in literary competitions in the category of comedic monologue and has played soccer for 13 years. It's a long time. Outside of Augusta Prep, Seth is a very avid reader, hence today's topic. A lover of Leicester City and UK athletics, he loves gaming, running, spending time with his brothers and sister, and his 2 cats. The topic of his speech today is about book-to-movie adaptations. Please welcome Seth Crowson to the stage.
First off, I'd like to thank Mr. Galvin for being a great advisor for the past 2 years. And a special thanks to Mr. Mason for stepping in at the last minute to help out and introduce me. I would also like to thank my family for always supporting me through my reading addiction, and my cats for keeping me company while I read. Now, the topic of my speech is a natural progression of my interests. I have always been an avid reader who could just sit down and be perfectly happy for a couple of hours every day with a good book after school. I will be the first to admit, when a book captures my attention, I can obsess over it for a bit until it's finished. Hence why over the last break I read a 1,700-page book in less than 48 hours, which I know is slightly unhealthy behavior. I am also quite aware that most of you guys watching my speech today are not avid readers, and in fact dread whenever you have a reading assignment in English, or just don't read the book in the first place. I know you've heard Mr. Morgan, Mims, and Lutz not to watch the movie for the book you're reading, and if you're expecting me to tell you the same, you're entirely correct. I would always recommend reading the book first, unless in the very rare case that the movie was created before the book, in which case it is a movie-to-book adaptation and does not fall under the purview of my speech. But why do people prefer one or the other? Well, it tends to come down to just that, personal preference. Books tend to be a longer affair, and at times it can be a slog to get through. But they offer more when it comes to pure backstory and information given. You tend to get a more fleshed out and concrete story in the books, rather than their adaptations due to the constraints of creating a movie. When the movie is made, they have to cut down the book to an agreeable script that can keep an audience entertained the whole time. These cuts can lead to plot holes or just leave some things unexplained. But what movies do better, and is probably why most people prefer to watch the movie rather than reading, is that you can visualize everything better. It is literally shown in front of you, giving you a clear picture of what something looks like, rather than just a description. Movies show you how the events play out, and tend to not leave many questions as to what happened, because they're not bogged down by the words and the descriptions that many people tend to gloss over when reading books. And that's the appeal of watching a movie adaptation of the book. Everything's presented to you in a much simpler fashion as you visually watch the story progress. But movies have their limitations. They can't usually give you the exact thoughts and feelings of each character in an easy description. They have to find a way to show it on the screen through actors' expressions and body language towards each other. And this is one of the faults of the movies that goes along with what I said before. Most of the time, movie scripts have to cut things from the books. And this can be a very big deal, as you can have major characters from books relegated to just side characters or cut altogether, because their full inclusion into the movie would just slow it down and mess up the pace, or just not be entertaining enough for an audience. It leaves the fans of the books wanting, but for the people who just watch the movie, it's not a big issue. But enough of the boring stuff about pacing and descriptions. Let's move on to actual examples of book-to-movie adaptations, starting with The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. This is your classic dystopian novel, and it's probably the most widely known of its genre, and one of the main reasons why dystopias are so popular today in young adult literature. And in terms of a book-to-movie adaptation, it's actually a pretty faithful adaptation. Nearly all of the plot points stay the same, and none of the themes change. The main difference between the two is narrative structure. The books are entirely from Katniss's point of view, as we only see her thoughts and what she sees throughout the book. The audience only knows what she knows. The movies are different, however. While for the most part, Katniss is the one followed, and we see mostly only her point of view, there are some cuts to other characters and other scenes to either give context or to set up the rest of the trilogy, or more accurately, the quartet, because they decided to split the last movie into two books, or book into two movies. The only major difference is how Katniss gets her famous Mockingjay pin. In the books, it's given to her by one of the few sort of friends she made in District 12, the mayor's daughter, Madge. In the movie, she buys it at the market as a present for her sister, who gives it back to her before Katniss has to go to the games. In the end, the giving of the pin by either Madge or Prue has the same effect on Katniss. It doesn't change the plot as a whole, which is the same for all the changes made to the story from book to movie. Yes, the book explains far more of how Panem works, and you can see a whole lot more detail, but the movie captures the essence and the tone of the books really well, as you can visually see the disconnect between the capital and the districts, and the disregarded cruelty being made sport through the games. I will fully admit, though, if you're hoping for any sort of analysis on Katniss, Peeta, Gale love triangle, keep looking. I am not one for the romance plots in the media, and to be honest, it kind of stays the same throughout the books and the movies, and is pretty well adapted. They portray Katniss's betrayal of Peeta at the end really well in the movie. I actually kind of like that sequence better than the books. But when looking at the entirety of both of these, I would say the movie is a particularly faithful adaptation that only really makes changes to either help with pace or sets up further for the sequels, or just because of the restrictions of being a movie. But all in all, it's a good adaptation. Now, the next example is one that I actually did not read the book first for, and that, of course, is Princess Bride by William Goldstein. This is an odd one because they have two very different tones to them. The book is presented as an abridged version of a long fantasy novel, with Goldman's persona of an editor popping up and explaining some of the cuts he made from the novel. This is all done in a satirical fashion, making fun of the way that fantasy novels tend to have long soliloquies and seemingly pointless descriptions of mundane things in world building that just seems to go on for forever, or so I'm told. I actually enjoy reading all that stuff, but the point is that the book is trying to make fun of the fantasy adventure romance novels by making a very, very stereotypical one and purposely cutting out all the stuff that people find to be more boring. It's a fun read, but quite different from the experience you get from watching the movie. The movie is not poking fun at the typical fantasy, but instead it just leans into it, making it a fun time. Gone is the commentary about how fantasy authors are confusing in their writing, and instead it focuses more on the relationship and love between Buttercup and Wesley. It creates a very standard but expertly crafted fantasy. All that being said, the story with Buttercup, Wesley, Inigo, and Fezzik are all in the books. They're just the medium in which the author is using to make his point. But one thing the movie kept in and actually expanded on even further from the book was the idea of the editor being read the book as a child. This pops up in the book where the editor would talk about the fondness he had for the book and the way his father read it to him. And this shows up in the movie with the storyline of the grandson and his grandfather reading the book, The Princess Bride, to him. Except this is played out more and we get to see an actual relationship between the two, unlike in the book. And this is what helps to make the magic of the movie. The dismissal of the book as a pointless romance novel by the grandson, only for him to be engrossed by the story and the action that comes with it. So, when looking at the two, I would say that in spirit, the movie is not a very faithful adaptation of some of the main themes of the book. But in the actual viewing of events, it's actually a pretty faithful adaptation, with many of the famous quotes being ripped directly from the book. But all in all, just a halfway faithful adaptation. And lastly, How to Train Your Dragon by Cressida Cowell. I'm sure many of you had no idea How to Train Your Dragon was based off of a book. And if that's the case, you're probably even more amazed to know there are actually 12 books in the series, compared to the only 3 movies. But this actually doesn't factor in quite as much as you might think, because the movies are an incredibly loose adaptation of the books. not really being that true of an adaptation at all. Sure, they are both a coming-of-age story, where Hiccup the horrendous Haddock III is trying to find a way to fit in with his Viking plan, but the way the two go about this journey is quite different. The first major difference narratively is the use of the titular dragons. In the movie, they are the enemies of the Vikings, in which Hiccup has to try and bridge the gap between the two species with his friendship with Toothless. However, in the books, dragons are not the enemies of the Vikings. They're actually pets, and used in a similar vein as to hunting dogs, or in some cases used to ride. And this is quite the big shift. In the books, Hiccup's journey to becoming a hero in the clan is actually much different, as he's still seen as an outsider for many of the books. But through his journey, his heroism grows as times get tougher. He becomes a Viking hero by the end. But even with this massive shift, the first movie and the first book actually have some similar plot points. In both, we see Stoic the Vast, Hiccup's father, trying to do what's best for the clan, and deal with his son at the same time, and the general disconnect between the two. However, this plays a much more major role in the movie than in the book. We also see the climactic battle between Hiccup, Toothless, and a massive dragon. Now, the themes and plot points are great and all, but the easiest way for you to see the difference in how the books are portrayed is the characters. First of all, you know what Toothless looks like in the movies, right? This big, cat-like dragon that Hiccup rides on? Well, in the books, he looks like this, which is quite the major shift as he goes from being a big, scary dragon to a very small, common-looking dragon. It's actually quite the big plot point in the book, describing Toothless saying, quote, "The most extraordinary thing about this dragon was how extraordinarily small it was," end quote. Another small detail that changes the whole thing is that Hiccup can talk to dragons in the books. That's right, Hiccup speaks Dragonese, which is a major plot point in the first book, because he is the only one who can speak with the big, dangerous dragon terrorizing the island of Berg. But even with all of these changes, the books and the movies are on a very similar ground, I feel, in terms of quality. While the world building isn't quite as strong, and we don't see Hiccup's relationship with many of the characters on a deeper level, the movie does exceptionally well with its narrative of Hiccup and Toothless's unlikely friendship, and the bond that they share. And I feel as if the relationship between Hiccup and his father is more fleshed out in the movie compared to the books. But that being said, the books offer more world building and more adventures that are just a good time. And while they may be geared towards children, they're still a good read that goes into some really deep topics that have some really great character arcs. But all in all, it's not actually that faithful of an adaptation. Now, while you may think I chose these examples because I just like these books and movies, you would actually be partially right. I do like these books and their respective movies, but each has something different to them that I'd like to highlight, and it's how faithful to the book that they are. The Hunger Games is pretty much a one-to-one adaptation of the story, only cutting out minor details and keeping the story themes and characters pretty much the exact same. It's a very faithful adaptation that translates well to the movie. The Princess Bride is also a sort of faithful adaptation that does cut out a major part of the story, though. The editor's thoughts about the fictional book he's cutting down. And by getting rid of this commentary, it changes how the theme and story works, but still makes for an entertaining movie. But by cutting this and playing up the story with the grandson and his grandfather, you have a major change that makes the movie work more smoothly, and one that I personally enjoy. But finally, you have How to Train Your Dragon, which is an incredibly loose adaptation that still makes for an incredible movie. While the books and movies are not the same, besides just a few major themes, they make for a good time either way. But I am highlighting this for you guys to show the main point of why I'm up here. You need to read the book. When in your English class you are tempted to just forget the book and watch the movie, remember, the movie is not always a faithful adaptation. In fact, many movies are not entirely faithful to the source material. But if you skip straight to that, you wouldn't know, which is why you need to read the book. That way you could recognize where the movies make changes and understand the changes so you can analyze them better. And while this may just be me, I find it to be a much more whole experience when watching a movie if I've read the book first. So please, whenever you're tempted to skip the reading and watch the movie, don't. Remember my speech. And thus, I will leave you all with a plea from the English teacher. Just read the book. Thank you.